Hi everyone, welcome to Circle Healing Connection. This is Angela.
And this is Madhu. It is such an honor to have Darcey with us. She's a grandma of 6 children and has been raising two of them for the past 16 years. Darcey is a master relationship coach, a master life coach, a Reiki master teacher, a licensed massage therapist, an author, an inspirational speaker, and a minister of spiritual church. She helps people heal into right relationship with themselves and helps empower them to be warrior of their truth. Wow. Welcome, Darcey. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you so much. It's my honor to be here. I really admire what you are doing, and I'm so glad I get to be a part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Darcy. Would you tell us about your life story and what brought you to be a transformational and relationship coach today?
Sure. I was reflecting on my life story and realized that my life story started before I was born because of generational trauma and generational events and conditioning that is given to from your ancestors down through your parents. And so they have that conditioning going on, which they unconsciously bring into their parenting. So I think with generational trauma, it came before I was born. And then you have what I call societal as well as cultural conditioning as well, which is really evident with my parents. My dad's Caucasian and my mom is Japanese American. And her mother and her aunties and grandparents immigrated from Japan when her mom was 14. So there's that goes into it as well. So there's a lot of different cultural differences that came blended together when my parents got married. So, and then as you go on, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I was sexually molested when I was 10 by my step grandfather. And I say fortunately, or what I can say is I blame him for giving me the strength to stand in my power. And I blame him for giving me the insight to experience everything that I have experienced. So I kept that inside of me. And when he did that, that little girl stopped existing, or she became silent and hidden and that was one of my inner critic things that my inner critic told me. And that was when my inner critic was birthed at that moment, telling me that I'm worthless, hide so you're not seen, so you can't be abused again. And so very much diminished who I was as a child. So all the innocence, the living out loud just came to a halt. And so carrying that with me, affected my life from that point on. And so then you roll into where I'm a teenager, and of course, hormones are raging in addition to, so you're not focusing on your nuclear family anymore, but you're looking at broadening your social scope, and now your peers are involved. And other teens aren't always that nice. You have bullying going on, and other factors that happen within a teenager normally, and then you add on what's going on within society. So, recalling something when I was a child is that President Kennedy was murdered when I was about 4. I think I was 4. And so I didn't understand that. That meant nothing to me. But my parents, who loved him like a family member, would communicate that fear that, they would hug me more, they would love on me more, and unconsciously it was communicated. So that also carried through. So that's how societal events can affect children, and they carry it with them in their core beliefs. And so trauma happening before you're 10 becomes embedded, entangled in the belief system that your parents have given you, the generational expectations. So you don't know what is really yours and what is not. And so you move forward with this. And of course I did. So I married my junior high school sweetheart. We were 13 when we met, and it was more out of a desperation for me to have someone who I knew had my back, that was focused totally on me, which was totally unfair to my husband, because I didn't heal from my woundedness. So I wasn't my authentic self. And for him, he was wounded as well. And of course, none of us realized that. I don't even know if he would realize it to this day. But we came together and we're married. And then he was in the military. He decided to cross-train to be air crew on the military airplanes. And we had children at this point. And so with what I was expected to do, what my parents instilled in me was to be that supporting character in my marriage, was to be the wife, the caretaker of the children, get a job if you need to, but primarily keep the home fires burning while your spouse is out doing what they're supposed to. And I was the model military spouse, but that wasn't really me. And so we got orders to move to another state, and the children were in second and fourth grade at that point. And so they acclimated well, but as they got into the teenage years, that's when, again, teenage hormones, their brain's not fully developed until they're 25. And my daughter took it harder than my son did. And so she started using chemicals at 11. She would ditch school and drink alcohol at a friend's house. She got involved with drugs. And of course, when you start introducing chemicals, that's when their development slows or almost stops. And so she wasn't her chronological age as far as development was concerned. So as she moved into the teen years and, started getting older, she couldn't process, and I'm speaking for her, I haven't really asked her these questions before, as to why she attempted to take her life. And this was 3 times that she tried to take her life. And the last time that she attempted to take her life, she almost succeeded. So when that didn't occur, that didn't happen, then in right, wrong, I said that God had a special plan for her. And I don't know if I scared her, but then she started making really drastic choices of hanging around people who were not making good choices in their lives towards criminal behavior. And then that wasn't enough. So she started hanging out with gang members. So there's that process there that occurred for her. And as time continued on, my brother passed away in 98 on my birthday. And then my father passed away on Christmas Eve the same year, so 6 months later. And it was really traumatic. Obviously, it was traumatic, but I don't even think I've processed through it all. So I'm burying all this inside because I'm still working to ensure that my daughter remains safe and taking care of everything. So as we continue on, so then my mother began falling, and because she was living by herself, she began falling. And so we moved her in with us, and my ex and I, and she, almost simultaneously, my daughter and it was then her husband, basically abandoned the kids. She had 2 children. So I'm kind of fast forwarding through all of this. She had 2 children, and because they weren't developmentally at their chronological age, they were still wanting to go out and party. And the dad took off first and left my daughter there with the kids. And of course she was rebelling against this, and she would leave. And so then I would have the 2 kids who were almost 2 then and 9 months, and then my mother as well. And everybody's in diapers and, caretaking everybody. My mom slowly goes into dementia and doesn't like the attention that I'm giving to specifically my grandson. And things come to a head where her behavior toward him is concerning. And so my sisters and I make the decision to put her into assisted living, which really goes against our Japanese culture, where you keep the parents at home and you caretake them. But it was me by myself trying to do this all, and I couldn't do it. And so I'm waving the white flags asking for help. And so then as we continue on, the kids get older, and I reached the point where my mother passes away. And as I sit there and think about this, and I'm talking to my medical doctor about what's going on, he was a fabulous doctor. He's going, do you want to live this way for the rest of your life? Because I was clearly unhappy. And what I focused on was just a portion of my healing, not the whole thing in entirety, because my abuse, that sexual molestation, what never came up to the surface. I had buried it so deep. I was focused on, okay, I'm living based on an outdated model of what a wife should be. And I'm tired of being part of the backdrop of what his dream was. And I understand now that I wasn't being fair to him and he wasn't being fair to me. So it was neither one of our fault that we didn't get married on a true relationship because we were still wounded. And so when my doctor is telling me this, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I'm about 48 then. It's like I have the rest of my life to live very unhappy, or I can make a change. And I chose to make a change. And thinking and coming to now, thinking that if I move back to where I grew up, which was California, then I could get back to where I was and start living out loud again. And of course, that was totally false. That doesn't happen. Everybody moves on. And it just didn't click with me that everybody would move on. Rationally, I understood that, but deep in my heart, where my inner child was, it was like, we can go back and we can start over. Well, there was some trauma in San Diego and I lasted there for a year and I came back. And when I came back, I was suicidal because it was like, okay, nothing is working for me. I can't parent. So I'm parenting my grandkids. I can't parent. And the main reason why I moved back to Washington, as harsh as it sounds, is that I knew that there would be people immediately available to take care of my grandkids and that, they would cushion the blow and they wouldn't be alone. And I know it sounds very harsh. They wouldn't be alone with my body. And so I was that way for a couple weeks. And finally something clicked in and I went to see my doctor, the same doctor who told me, you need to make a choice. Do you want to be this way? And he gave me antidepressants because I had been off antidepressants for 2 years. He put me back on antidepressants and we had some conversation. I didn't necessarily go to see a therapist at that point. I just couldn't generate the energy. And so with the medication and talking to some really close friends, I was able to turn it around and pull up that inner strength that's always been with me and say, no, I'm not going to do this. And so I was able to say, okay, I'm taking my life back and I'm going to write a book. And so, which is what I did about what healing I had achieved to that point that I thought was the healing of everything. Mm-hmm. And so I finished the book and it chronicles, it's like a memoir up to the point of this realization when I moved back to Washington. But as I'm trying to get the platform up and running, I realized that I'm out of sync. It's not gelling. It's not coming across fluidly like it's part of me, where it's just a natural conversation where what your focus is, what your divine purpose is, should come out very easily. I was struggling, and I was struggling all the time because my heart is with helping women like my daughter, who through the choices that they made, their woundedness, their actions have caused, in her case, she has felonies and it's very difficult for her to get a job. And she has another little one that she's raising. And so she's struggling. And every time she goes out and tries to integrate into normal society, she gets slammed and she can't fit in. And there's a whole, I call them a tribe of women who are like this, who are in this cycle, and they can't break out of that cycle to move into right relationship with themselves and heal their woundedness. So that's where my heart really lies. But yet my book was directed to women of my age, of saying, okay, come into, identify your power and be like a phoenix and rise above it and leave who you were in the ashes. That story is, yes, it's my story, but it's not the one that I'm living right now. Mine is to help specifically the women of my daughter's age to get beyond that. And that's something that I'm problem solving, trying to figure out how to do it. And so having that, coming to that point, and then God put certain people in my life to help me move forward and help me heal what the real trauma was, which was the molestation of my grandfather. And it took 2 healing sessions that were very intense for me to say, okay, no more, I forgive you. And, and they moved on out of my life. My inner child was there, as well as my step grandfather, who was just a man who was wounded as well. I don't know why he was wounded, but he was wounded. And so they left, and that just freed my heart. And I realized it's all about relationships. The master life coach was the first step in knowing the basics of how to help people. The instinct, the desire, the skills have been within me. As a massage therapist, I've been coaching. I'm not realizing it at the beginning that I've been coaching my patients. I have an hour with them. And so as I'm coaching my patients, then I've had, 10 years of this experience. But to actually focus and say, I can help this person move into right relationship with themselves was something that was initially scary for me, but now it's like breathing. It's what I'm supposed to do. So that was the shift into working on relationships. And the most important relationship is the one we have with ourselves. Because if we don't have that foundation and we don't work from a heart of love in everything that we do, then we're not consciously parenting, and we're not consciously interacting with our loved ones. And that was a disservice that I did to my mother as well. But I had no idea. And so that's forgiveness for me, which is important. So that's how I moved into relationship coaching and life coaching.
That's an inspiring story from circumstances that are so painful that can break a child, a woman, for life. It takes so much away from that little girl when she's molested to it sometimes is impossible for women to come back from that. But
It
you
is.
turned it around. I am so proud of you for that. And
Thank you.
I mean, you mentioned something about the generational trauma. I would like you to explain more to our viewers and to even us, like what exactly do you mean? And how do we transform that inner critique to our inner wisdom, that strength, even though we have the support group, people telling, oh no, you know, things will be okay, blah, blah, blah. We still don't get to recognize, and then sometimes people end up making those drastic steps like committing suicide, like what your daughter did.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I would like you to guide us through that part, to how to even turn those inner critiques to inner wisdom.
So starting off with the inner critic and the inner wisdom, the inner critic, again, in my belief, is birthed with trauma. And in my case, it was pretty profound, where, and then coupled with it happening before I'm 10, makes its tendril. So when I would think about being that incident, when it actually came up to the surface and I recognized it for what it was, when I visualized it, all I saw was this big ogre of a man. I mean, he was like 8 feet tall, standing next to a neon yellow 10-speed. And what that signified was that was my grandfather, and he tried to he did buy us off with 10 speeds. And as I was sharing the story, and I let my sister know it was going to be in the book, I found out that she had been molested as well. And this is, I'm at 57 years old, and we're having this conversation. And this is the first time that she and I ever talked about it. We both kept it internalized. And so her journey is her journey. And when she's ready, if she ever will be, that's, there's no right or wrong here. So when that's birthed, part of it is you don't recognize whether it's really your inner critic or if this is the real voice that you're supposed to hear, where you have no value, you can't do anything right, those things that just hinder you. And so it's coming, you have to face the trauma and recognize where it comes from. And so the second healing session So the first healing session brought him down to a dirty old man. He wasn't 8 feet tall anymore. And the neon yellow bike didn't glow in the dark anymore. It was just a yellow color. And so it was bringing it down to a level that I was no longer the little girl facing him as an ogre. I'm a woman looking at him. And understanding that I'm a woman looking at him, it took me a while to come around to say, I have my own power. You don't belong here. And so you need to go. And so as I'm going through the healing process, the person who was helping me, was channeling him, and he was saying that he wanted forgiveness. And then, of course, very similar to the stages of grief, anger hit like this. It's like, why should I forgive you for what you've done? And then slowly going through the process, it was, I have to forgive him so I can move on, because he's been deceased for decades. And so forgiving him healed me inside. And then I was able to move forward. Once that occurred, then I could look at that inner critic and understand where it came from and say, no, this is a lie, but it's been with me for so long. If I don't fill it with something else, there's going to be a hole, a mental hole, an internal hole. So you have to fill it with affirmations, positivity. It's your inner wisdom that comes through. And that is where you do have value. You have skills that are God-given, creator-given, and you're supposed to do certain things with these skills, or otherwise, why did you have them? And these are all choices that we have to make. And some people aren't ready to face that. They don't know that they have trauma. They don't know that with that trauma birthed an inner critic. So they can't really address it, and they're not ready to. Or there's those ones who know that something's off, but they're not ready to face it. And there's those others who know they have it and ignore it. And then there's me, who said, and it took me a long time because I went through all those stages, is, okay, I'm done. And I want my power back. And I know that everything that I've experienced is going to help somebody else. And so that's how we turn it from inner critic to inner wisdom, knowing, though, that the tendrils are so deep that sometimes I'll come across something and start thinking, well, I can't do that. And then I have to sit back and analyze it and say, no, that's inner critic. And so, yes, I can do this. I can make the attempt. And if I'm not successful, there's lessons learned, and I can try again if that's what I'm supposed to do. So that's the whole, my belief around inner critic and inner wisdom. And so generational trauma, generational conditioning comes from, again, your ancestors, how they were raised and why they were raised. So in my case, you have the Japanese traditions and beliefs, and then you have my father's traditions and beliefs. So he was born in West Virginia back in 1929. And he was illegitimate in 1929. And my grandmother gave birth to a child out of wedlock. And so she was verbally discriminated against as well. And, with what you can visualize is the women then wanted all their men to stay away from her and called her vulgar names. And then my dad was the sole male supporting his mom against all of this negativity. I'm not sure when they found my father's stepfather but where my grandmother married him and how long they had this relationship. But my dad came from a wounded point where his father abandoned him before he was born and was a liquor runner during the Prohibition. And so he didn't want to be, stationary or be caught because he was running liquor. And so my dad had that hardness within him towards his father and built up the belief that to ensure that we were safe, his daughters, was to marry a man who was solid, would take care of us financially, would keep us safe. And that was his dream and his goal based on what happened to him during, the early 30s. And so, which all makes sense. But and as we function, we don't factor in that time continues to flow, and that doesn't always fit. And then you look at my mom, she was born in Honolulu as a Japanese American and adopted the Hawaiian culture as well as the Japanese culture. So her generation, what is not truly Japanese in the sense of Japanese. And so there's more of a Hawaiian feel to it. And so she has both of those cultures together. And so, bless her heart, she went to school, to American school, Monday through Friday. When she came home, she went to Japanese school Monday through Friday plus Saturday. And so this is the things that, you know, she had to do as she was growing up. But the most profound thing that happened to her was it would be her grandparents forced her mom into an arranged marriage, which was common then. So my grandmother had to marry a certain man. Well, my grandmother didn't. She was a bit of a rebel. She didn't like it. So she divorced him and brought shame upon the family. Huge shame. And so she got together with another gentleman and had my mom. And I think my mom was about 2. And my grandmother couldn't survive. My sisters and I pieced this together, that my grandmother couldn't survive